I'm Nathan Ponchard, this is Chasing Cars, and this is the updated 2021 Alfa Romeo Stelvio Veloce. The whole difference between the 21 model and the models in the past is that there actually is now a Veloce model in the Stelvio. Previously that was only in the Giulia, but it kind of replaces the TI anyway and has the same drivetrain, so it's just sort of a name. It does look a little bit different to the two models that are underneath it, which is the Stelvio, which is to order only in Australia, and Stelvio Sport. And what sets this car apart is that it does have a little bit of Quadrifoglio-esque styling, but still has the 2-litre under the bonnet. So at the front here, we've got all of this sort of matte black detailing, the quite deep body kit that runs around and around the side of the car and has those sort of colour-coded wheel arch flares that are black on the other cars. I kind of think they should have stayed black, but let us know what you think. What sets the Stelvio Veloce apart from its predecessor, which was called Stelvio TI, is mainly the name, which means it still has a 206 kilowatt, 400 Newton meter tune of Alfa Romeo's 2-litre turbo petrol 4-cylinder on the bonnet, and not the twin turbo V6 that this quite sporty look implies it might have. And I think that's kind of a good thing. The engine itself is strong and the look is really strong. At the front here, the Stelvio Veloce has the same lights as other Stelvio models, which is a normal Stelvio and a Stelvio Sport, which means it has this adaptive front lighting system with adaptive high beam and a few other things. These wheels are also Veloce specific, which are 20-inch wheels with Michelin tyres. Now, as we move around here, the shape of the Stelvio is sort of kind of like trying to fill the gap between the German rivals that it competes against, who have both a coupe version and a wagon version. This is sort of like a wagon that's trying to look a little bit like a coupe. I feel like the back's a little bit hunchback shaped, but it does definitely have a unique presence to the car. I think if it did have a coupe version, it'd be a step too far, and a full wagon version might also be a step too far, but then maybe a Giulia wagon would actually be a better option. We'll talk about that later. Around the back here, we have the body kit that extends into this lower garnish that houses these two cool black exhaust pipes, although you can actually see the size of the exhaust in the middle of them, which is a bit, gives the game away a little bit. We also have Q4 on the tailgate because all Australian Stelvios are all-wheel drive. And again, Stelvio in this cool, glossy black badging, which I really love. The Stelvio Veloce also has an electric tailgate. As standard, it's meant to be hands-free, but I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to kick under the car and fall over, which reveals this surprisingly awesome and beautifully finished boot. Like, you might think that an Alfa Romeo might be not quite on par with everything else, but I think that that is completely refuted by what we see here. It has lovely carpeting down the side. It has these cool sort of luggage rails that can be moved back and forth with the luggage net to tie luggage down. It has a 40-20-40 split backrest with these little levers down here that can pop it open, as well as two takeaway hooks, 12-volt outlet, two lights instead of one, and this quite cool little luggage cover that does show that this is probably really a coupe because it only goes to there and it sort of still covers the whole entire luggage bay. And underneath the floor here, we have a self-inflating kind of spare thing that you hope you never have to use. Much like the outside, the changes inside the 2021 Stelvio Veloce aren't great, but they are good at what they do. The chief change here is this touchscreen in the center here. Now, if anyone remembers what the Giulia was like when it launched, it had a big flat screen which you thought was going to be all multimedia, and it appeared this tiny little crapo square thing in the middle, and you were like, is that it? Whereas this thing has 8.8 inches, which isn't even big in nowadays, but it's still plenty in this car. It's sort of fairly seamless. It lets you sweep through all these little different things. You know, we've got performance gauges, climate, my phone, navigation, driver assistance, mostly easy to access. And in this case with 10 speakers, more than the base cars, but not the optional $1,750 Harman Kardon stereo, which I feel like you just should pick. The rest of the center console here has also been sort of cleaned up a bit. It looks neat, doesn't really look expensive, but then that's what this leather stitch dash top and that stuff is for. That's also part of the Veloce's package. This really cool stitching across the edge here, leather all the way across here, leather right across the doors, this lovely leather flat bottom steering wheel with these little perforation sections here. We've got fixed steering wheel paddles for the 8-speed automatic, and very Ferrari-esque, we've got a starter button on the steering wheel. These controls here are beautifully easy to use, and generally so are the ones in the center as well. Unfortunately, the dynamic damper DNA thing that the Veloce has, which only has dynamic and normal and an A, which is for eco, doesn't really give you the option, in fact it doesn't give you the option at all, of being able to change certain elements of it. As for the general practicality of the Stelvio Veloce, it has these two quite deep cup holders in here. You can put your key in this little slot here and rest that there, which I haven't because it looks ugly on the camera. It has wireless charging where your phone slots down in this little slot here. We have one USB port here, which is fairly easy to access and easy to run Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but we also have another USB-C, an auxiliary plug, and a USB-C inside here, plus another 12-volt outlet, because there's also a 12-volt outlet there. So the Stelvio is actually quite well finished and quite well thought about. If only the doors would take some kind of decent bottle. I can put this thing in there, but it kind of just falls down. There's a coffee in there at the moment, but it's sort of side on and I would not trust it at all. Veloce also adds these beautiful seats. I felt like a standard Stelvio that I've driven in the past was a little bit like a Giulia on stilts, which is exactly what it is. But in this case, with these lovely big bolsters around the side, 8-way adjustment for both front seats. We also have heating for both front seats and the back seat, and these cool manual thigh extenders here that we have on the passenger side as well, just make you feel like you're in a really ensconced, comfortable position. I also love this huge sunroof in here, which just really opens up the cabin in the front, especially in this car where everything is black. One thing I should point out though is that for this Vesuvio grey Stelvio Veloce, I would have chosen the red leather option, which is no cost and changes everything from the tide line down into red leather, including all the doors, all the seats. All of this is just like someone opened a vein. You can also get that in chocolate, which I've only seen on screen and it looks a little bit distasteful. I'd probably rather tan, probably rather this than that, but the red one looks really good and it could have made this interior pop, and we don't have it here. Otherwise, I feel like the quality and the general vision and the comfort in this Stelvio Veloce is much better than you'd probably expect. Much like the front seats, the back seat in the Stelvio is surprisingly comfortable. In fact, it's really quite deep. The angle of this cushion here means you do really sit into the seat in this car, and the two outer seats are really respectably comfortable. The center seat looks like it's going to be good and the bottom of it's fine, but that backrest bit there is hard as a rock and it's really only for children, to be honest. I should also point out that it doesn't have adjustable backrest rake, even though it has these little clips down at the bottom here which you can use to clip and unclip the backrest like that. And on this one here, in this car, while it sounds like it's clipped in, it'll still move around a bit, which it doesn't on this side, which is slightly annoying. Like the front though, you do have these really cool leather stitched door tops. No cheapening of the car as you go back in the Stelvio. You have these padded door armrests as well, although they're not leather, but they are nice. You don't have proper door grabs, much like the front. You just have these little trays with little rubber bits in them. And in the doors here, there's just this misery little slot for like maybe a Red Bull or a Mother or something disgusting like that. There's, you know, if you're going to the club in Mykonos, great, but otherwise there's nowhere to put anything drinks-wise. Although there is in here, you can put two coffees here in quite a reasonably comfortable armrest, which are rubberized and have little rubber bits to hold stuff in place. In the center here, we have these two really cool eyeball air vents that match the two air vents on the other side in the front dash, and I love them. They're just so easy to use, and they're just a really cool design feature, but no temperature control, just the vents. We also have two USB ports down in the middle here, and we have the seat heating controls, which are a fair way away from the passenger, but at least you've got them. There's also another tray down the bottom here with a little non-slip pad, quite a high transmission tunnel, but that doesn't really matter because, as we know, the center seat's crap. So this is really only a two-seater, and both people also got these cool little netted map pockets, which are probably the best kind to have. It means you can shove anything in there and then it just springs back to where it's meant to be. The official combined fuel consumption figure for the Stelvio Veloce is 7 litres per 100 kilometres, although we average 12 litres per 100 kilometres, admittedly in a lot of urban running around during COVID lockdown, so not quite fair on a car that could be quite efficient. The warranty of this car is 3 years or 150,000 kilometres, and the roadside assistance for Alfa Romeo is also 3 years or 150,000 kilometres. The scheduled servicing of the car is every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, totaling $1,455 for 3 years or $2,865 across 5 years. Now, the Stelvio Veloce's whole reason for being is to have a little bit of the Quadrifoglio's sporting magic and visual flair mixed with a car that's relatively attainable and affordable, even though it's 80 grand. Given that that's only $15,000 more than the standard Stelvio, is actually pretty good value in my opinion, given that you get almost 50 kilowatts more power. Now with the 206 kilowatt engine tune, the Stelvio Veloce can do 0 to 100 in 5.7 seconds, which is exactly the same 0 to 100 time as the Giulia, because it has all-wheel drive and gets that kick off the line. The standard Stelvio does 7.2. The difference between top speed is 215 in the standard Stelvio, 230 in this Veloce, which is all pretty academic really, but it is a quicker car and the engine is really strong, really sweet and beautifully refined. When you put the D&A drive mode down here into D for dynamic, it does add a little bit of wrought to the engine tune, but this is nothing like Alphas of the past. We're in dynamic right now, and even then on this bumpy road, the ride is actually pretty good. It's surprisingly comfortable, to be honest. I suppose the thing that annoys me is that while D&A is a cute little set of numbers, or letters even, it doesn't give it enough options. Let's go back to normal here for a sec while this road's quite bumpy. The normal is really smooth, like it gives a terrific urban ride in this car, especially given that it's on 255 45 20s, but it does tend to lull the Alfa around a little bit over bumps. It tends to rock around a bit. I suppose it's not a major problem. I would prefer that over it being brittle and awful, but you can't really have it the way that you want it to. I want it to be with the suspension in dynamic but the engine in normal, and you only have the option of having the engine in dynamic and then hitting that little button like we mentioned earlier, like in a Ferrari, to turn the dampers to soft, which is just a bit too soft at times. But you know, treat it as a sub-quadrifoglio, sporty-ish, 80 grand-ish, premium, medium SUV. It's pretty appealing. It has a level of character way beyond a lot of the German SUVs that are a similar price. Even from things like its steering, like the turning circle in this car is pretty terrible. I couldn't even find a measurement of it, but I can tell you now, whatever it is crap. But it only has 2.2 turns lock to lock, so maybe even 2.15. So it's really sharp either side of straight ahead, and sometimes with that suppleness, it tends to make the steering move around in your hands, so it sort of exacerbates a little bit of that movement, which, you know, I suppose is kind of fun, but also just a little bit immature, I should say. And so, even though it has a little bit of that extra punch in terms of the engine acoustics when it's in dynamic, it's not enough to really have to warrant it. Like it's a pretty relaxed engine. Its maximum power is at 5,250 RPM, and yet it upshifts at the absolute highest at 5,800. That's very different to Alphas of the eras long gone by that loved to rev their tits off, and this is just a very torquey, relaxed, suave drivetrain mixed beautifully with an 8-speed automatic. The gear lever here is a little bit frustrating when you're moving around because it really needs a deliberate shove into drive or to reverse to make sure you've selected the proper gear. But you can flick it over to manual like that, and you have these beautiful big supercar-esque paddles here, and you have a downshift thing where pushing forward is downshift like on a BMW and in any proper performance car really, where it gives you that actual control rather than doing the other way around. So having the Stelvio stand higher than a normal Giulia, it doesn't have that beautiful, sweet suaveness that Giulia has, the way it mixes a supple and absorbent ride with this lovely poise and this great handling. There are elements of it in the Stelvio, but they're not as well resolved. There is a little bit of sort of lean over in the front end. You do need to drive this car to the way it wants to be driven to get the best out of it. You can't just get into it and naturally relax into the gait that it does so well like the Giulia does. Here you need to be conscious of where your braking is, conscious of where the nose is as you're braking into a corner, but then you can also stomp on it. This thing with the limited slip rear diff has tremendous kick out of the back end. You can really feel it working to just punch that Veloce out of a corner. But yeah, I suppose one thing that I should mention about all that is the brakes. They're meant to be upgraded in this car, but they're just kind of spongy and a bit not great. Like, you need to give a lot of pedal to make this thing pull up at times. And I don't know how they'd go if they were constantly getting punished. I think you could probably cook them quite quickly. Other aspects of the Stelvio that I think are surprisingly good include the 10-speaker stereo. I think it's got a really nice sound to it, although it doesn't have that kind of staging around the dashboard that I'm sure the Harman Kardon version would lift. I love the size of the sunroof in the front. It does give you a feeling of the car being airy and open, combined with a really nice view over the little lumped instrument dials in front of me and these really huggy seats. But then in the back you can see that big seam in the middle of it that's kind of a bit unsightly. And when the roof's all the way open, even double pressing it, it only goes to like kind of half to 2/3 of that front pane open. I just feel like I want it to go all the way back and it doesn't, which is a little bit disappointing. But you know, you do have glass. It does improve the vision in this car, because from the back these B-pillars are very thick, as many Alfa Romeos have been since, I think, probably the 159. In terms of safety, which is what that B-pillar thickness is about, the 2021 Stelvio brings adaptive cruise control, intelligent speed assist. It has speed sign recognition just in there in the instrument pack. It has blind spot monitoring, active blind spot assist. Nothing really out of the ordinary, but it does bring the car up to par, as does the larger multimedia. It needs those things to be kind of on a level playing field with other cars in 2021. Where the Stelvio is going to fall down ultimately is that it's built on the Giorgio platform, which is soon to be redundant because it isn't actually made for electrification. It can't be moved into the 2020s with that because it doesn't have that facility. And so while it's a great handling thing and it does really good things in the performance models and in the sedan version, it's kind of seeing out its days. Where the Stelvio to me seems to work better than normal is in the areas of finish, like when we went through the boot, the comfort in the back seat, some of the functionality of the car and the switchgear of the car, the refinement and the ride, all of those areas that add up to the polish of it that I think are better than what people expect out of it. But then, you know, the warranty isn't as long as some other rivals' warranties, which is probably a peace of mind thing for people. And when you look at how many people have actually bought a Stelvio, the best-selling year in Europe is in 2018. They only sold 30,000, and the best-selling year in America was 12,000. So while it's kind of thinking, well, the SUV is the car that's going to save Alfa Romeo, it clearly hasn't, and that's a bit of a shame because it's a likeable car, but I just don't think it's quite good enough for what it needs to be, and it's not as good as the sedan, which a lot of people still don't think is good enough for what it needs to be. Where this car works best, as per the sedan though, is in the Quadrifoglio version, not in one of the standard cars. So I suppose if I was summing up the Stelvio Veloce overall, I would say that as a day-to-day car, it's actually a pretty good thing. It's practical, it's reasonably handsome, it's certainly individual, it's torquey, it's effortless, it rides well, it sounds pretty good stereo-wise. It does a whole bunch of stuff that might be surprisingly unexpected for an Alfa Romeo SUV, but I don't think that it does enough to be able to stand out from the crowd, and I think that those sales figures that I mentioned before prove that the Stelvio hasn't quite achieved the cut-through that it really needed to be able to make Alfa Romeo do what they needed to do, which was sell hundreds of thousands of cars, not tens of thousands. If we were talking common sense here, we would be discussing the Alfa Romeo Giulia station wagon, but we're not, because that doesn't exist. We have the Stelvio, because the world loves SUVs, not station wagons, like car nerds like myself. But As a medium SUV and a premium medium SUV, the Stelvio Veloce is actually a really nice car. The car that we see here is just under $80,000 recommended retail price. Once you add the driveway cost, it's about $86,000. And this car, if we add the metallic paint, which is $2,000, and the sunroof and the stereo that it should have, then we're sort of thinking low 90s. And that's really not that expensive, given what some of its competition cost, until you think about something like the Genesis GV70 that Tom drove the other week, that in its base form in the twin turbo V6 is 83, and an absolute maximum you can spend on it is the same price as the Stelvio Veloce with all that stuff that I just mentioned. So while a Europhile will absolutely love this car, I think someone who really does their sums and looks at it on paper and goes, what can I get for the money, would probably realize that much like a lot of the German SUVs, the Stelvio Veloce is definitely a premium priced car with a premium price. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on the 2021 Alfa Romeo Stelvio Veloce or on Chasing Cars. Thanks for watching.